All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get over the speculation real quick. And to do this, we are going to watch a video from CBS News while also watching or reading a little bit of what Fox News has written on the speculation of the United States leaving NATO. Now, do I think leaving NATO is going to happen? Let's leave that till the end of the video. For the time being, though, let's go ahead and look at a little bit of fan art before we get into things, because if we don't, then we are just staring into the abyss without the abyss being able to stare at us back, and that's just not right. So, looking at the first bit of fan art we have here from Living Thrashcan, this thing is adorable. You could convince me that this is a keychain that somebody legitimately has. You really could. That is adorable. Thank you, Living Thrashcan. As always, if you want your fan art to be shown in a future video, the best way to do so is to drop it into the fan art section of the Discord. With that all said, let's go ahead and get right into things. First of all, from 33 minutes ago, here is CBS News. Let's see what they've got to say about this.
Can Europe put a Ukrainian peace deal back together again? 2 days after a calamitous White House meeting between President Trump and Ukrainian leader Zelenskyy,
Okay, so for those who don't remember, Zelenskyy went to talk to Trump, and Trump wanted to be able to get a lot of minerals from Ukraine because Ukraine is rich in important minerals for lots of manufacturing processes. And, well, it kind of broke down. JD Vance and Trump basically seemed like they just wanted a fight the entire time, and, well, a fight they got. And most people seem to be on Zelenskyy's side, pointing out that if your country was being invaded, you would act the exact same way. But yeah, that's just kind of the TLDR of what happened there. How's it going, Shesh?
UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer called an emergency meeting with his European NATO partners. The message? As the war in Ukraine marches into its fourth year, it's time for the countries of Europe to take security into their own hands. I'm joined now by foreign correspondent Ramy Inocencio. So, Ramy, what were the big things that came out of this meeting over the weekend?
John, yeah, good to see you. Well, for starters, Prime Minister Starmer announced funding of 1.6 billion pounds for Ukraine. That's about $2 billion US dollars, and that's to buy some 5,000 British air defense missiles.
All right, so why is this happening? Let's go ahead and quickly talk about what's going on here. The reason that we are seeing so much outpouring of money going towards Ukraine right now is because after the meeting with Zelenskyy, Trump basically said that the United States would be pulling all of its support for Ukraine effectively until Zelenskyy sat down and begged and groveled. He didn't use those exact words, but, you know, it's the same thing. He wanted Zelenskyy to kiss the ring. The end result of that is basically all of Europe going, we don't like Russia, and Ukraine is quite literally between us and Russia. Why don't we go ahead and send as much support as we possibly can to Ukraine so that Ukraine will continue being able to be the shield between, well, Russia and the rest of Europe. This is really kind of understandable because unlike the United States, that has, as Zelenskyy pointed out, a lot of water between us and Europe, you know, if you don't count Alaska, we are in a uniquely privileged situation to not get invaded that easily from Russia. Ukraine is not, and as an extension, most of Europe is not. I'm going to be right back. But basically, because the United States is pulling its support from Ukraine, a lot of other NATO countries are realizing that supporting Ukraine is probably a good idea right now. Now, the big disagreement at the moment is whether or not Ukraine will become part of NATO. And Ukraine should become part of NATO. Zelenskyy has even gone on record to say that he will gladly give up his presidency if it means that his country will be able to be in NATO, because that is what protects his country, proving that he is more of a leader than our wannabe dictator president ever could be. That said, let's go ahead and take a listen to the rest of what's going on in here.
Germany also was in the news with a report that officials might be working on not one, but two funds to support Ukraine. And then there's France. The government there is floating a 1-month partial ceasefire in French media. But the UK here says that there are still many different plans being discussed. Some of those include boots on the ground in Ukraine. And we're expecting more countries may make announcements on their own time.
And these proposals are they've been forced into them, presumably?
Frankly, yes, really out of necessity. That Trump-Zelenskyy blow-up that we saw, that the world saw at the White House on Friday, ended up really being a wake-up call about American reliability. And there are really two levels of security to this.
It's also a wake-up call about American isolationism. So, small history lesson. Back in the early 30s, when the rumblings of war were being discussed in Europe, there was a brown shirt movement in the United States that argued that we should never join any foreign conflict. And that brown shirt movement ended up sticking around for an incredibly long period of time. We're talking like 15 years. Constantly arguing that the United States should be isolated from the rest of the world and just look after our own. It was effectively a America First movement, and it's in fact where one of the earliest America First movements came from. And if you've never seen, if you've never seen the end results of these brown shirt and America First movements, well, let's go ahead and look at the lovely, lovely propaganda put out by Dr. Seuss around the time. And on this platform, folks, the most perplexing people, the lads with the Siamese beard, unrelated by blood, they are joined in a manner that mystifies the mightiest minds of the land. Of course, it was talking about the combination of the America First movement and the Nazi movement. Now, why were these two talked about in the same breath around that time in the 30s and 40s? Put very simply, it was because the America First and brown shirt movements effectively argued that America should not join the war against the Nazis and should leave not only Jewish people, but the rest of Europe, Poland, France, and everywhere else that were getting invaded by Germany at the time, should leave them to their own devices. It just simply wasn't our problem. Now, the reason that was given by these various movements was effectively that we should be looking after our own. But the actual argument, the actual reason many of these movements were propped up was not because American isolationism for prevention of our own people dying was what they wanted. It was because these people actually believed in the eugenics movement of Hitler. After all, the eugenics movements in Germany at the time were blueprinted based on our eugenics movements here. The treatment of Jewish people there were blueprinted based on our treatment of people here in the United States. In fact, so much of the Nazi regime was informed by things that America was already doing. It's kind of insane that we went to war on the side that we did, ultimately. So, Lenari says Hitler was inspired by what we did to the natives. Yes, exactly. So why would an America First movement, which MAGA predominantly is, why would an America First movement be arguing so vehemently for the isolation of the United States away from Ukraine right now? Well, it's no different. Russia is Germany in this scenario. It is functionally no different than what happened back then. Just replace Poland and France with Ukraine and eventually probably Poland, actually, and replace Germany with Russia. And you have all the same pieces to put us where we are at right now. Seffi says, and here's my 2 cents, don't get me wrong, I'm all for helping others, but I feel we have overdone it so much that we are just kind of getting boned because of others' choices. In what way, Seffi? I would like to hear your opinion on that. I would like to know where that's actually coming from, because what do you mean by we've helped so much and we've gotten boned? Like the huge debt? Yeah, but you realize that that national debt isn't because of foreign aid. Like, foreign aid does not make up the majority of the United States national debt. It is not the biggest contender there. In fact, USAID, which has the job of providing foreign aid to multiple other countries is seen as part of the United States soft power. It doesn't actually do anything negative for us. It actually allows us to have a lot of leverage on the global stage. Also, when you say we get boned in the end, what does that mean? What do you even mean by we get boned by there? If you're just going to vaguely point at the U.S. national debt, I can understand that perspective, but I don't see how that functions here. In fact, we can take a very quick detour to look at this if you'd like. All right, let's look at the U.S. national debt just in isolation real quick before we get into the rest of this. If you wince when you look at your monthly credit card bill, you may not believe what the U.S. government has racked up. The national debt tops more than $34 trillion. But how did the debt get so high? Well, the goal of paying it off might be wishful thinking. The debt is one of the rare times people have a chance to use the word trillion in a sentence without exaggerating it. It stands at $34 trillion as of January 6th. The first thing is about 1/4 or 1/3 of it doesn't actually count, though. It's debt that is held by another part of the government. So it would be like the wife owing the husband money. It doesn't actually affect the household, but the rest of it is still a huge number. So how did the U.S. accrue such a big debt? One of the main culprits is us consistently overspending. When the government spends more than its budget, it creates a deficit. In a fiscal year of 2023, it spent $381 billion more than it collected in tax revenue. To pay the deficit, the government borrows money. That can happen by selling marketable securities like treasury bonds. The national debt is the accumulation of borrowed money plus interest. It's spending 1.5 times as much as it is taking in. So an analogy that I'd like to give is imagine that a couple is making $80,000 between the two of them and spending $120,000 a year. We asked him if the U.S. is the equivalent of a person who only makes the minimum payments on a credit card, and Phelan took it a step further by saying the U.S. is like somebody who makes less than the minimum payments on a credit card. The country is literally built on debt. It was $75 million in the red after the Revolutionary War, thanks to the loans it took from investors like France. Who do we owe the money to? Well, mostly it's ourselves. A lot of pension funds own the government debt, money market funds own government debt, and then most people own these money market funds. Where does the money come from that would go towards paying off the debt? Well, it ultimately comes down to U.S. taxpayers. With such high debt, how does the country function? Well, the equation shows a country's ability to pay down its debt. The ratio is considered to be a better indicator of a country's fiscal situation than the national debt number because it shows the burden of debt relative to the country's total economic output and therefore its ability to repay it. The current ratio is about 123%. 2 decades earlier, it was down to 60%. According to CEIC, the highest ratio ever reached in the U.S. was 130% in 2021, roughly 1 year into the pandemic. So, effectively, the issue is a lot of things. It is not just spending on foreign interests. It is everything, everywhere, period. But the biggest thing the United States spends its money on is not foreign aid. The biggest thing the United States spends its money on is its own military. And the way that they pay down that debt is by taxing people with the most money. If you want the U.S. debt to decrease, the answer is very, very simple. It has nothing to do with cutting the amount of money we are giving to other countries, a thing that is actually required for the United States' soft power to maintain its own self-defense. The important part is for the United States to make billionaires pay their fair share. The important part is to make people who are in the upper 1% of income in the United States pay their fair share in taxes. By taxing the rich, you can generate enough wealth to pay down the United States debt. But you are not trying to pay off the United States debt down to zero. Again, we are a country quite literally built on debt. You will not be able to just erase the problem by saying, oh, well, we won't send money to these handful of countries that we've been sending money and supplies to. We're not sending enough to be a blip on the radar. It's like when companies argue that you as an individual need to be doing emissions on your car because you need to be making sure that your car is not a pollutant. When the reality is your vehicle individually is not polluting the environment anywhere near as much as an actual global industry is. And in fact, all United States vehicle drivers all at once do not equate to the amount of pollutants that our industrial complex is capable of outputting. But we still find reasons to tax the poor. We still find reasons to put more and more of that burden onto poor people. So if your argument is going to be, and not just you, Seffi, but anybody, if your argument is going to be we shouldn't be giving foreign aid because we have a big debt, then you need to keep that same energy and say, let's actually put the impact where it's going, or let's actually put the numbers where they're going to have the most impact. And the most impactful numbers for us are cutting military spending and increasing the tax burden on the wealthy. Those cause actual change, as opposed to things that shift the burden onto you and me, the poor people, or in this case, different countries that are very poor and need United States aid. And not just need United States aid because of a white savior complex, but literally are in the crosshairs and fire of countries like Russia, and therefore need that aid to protect themselves. And those countries, via proxy, are effectively a bulwark between us and those other countries. But I do find it interesting that with all of the foreign aid that people like Elon want to cut, we are still sending billions to Israel as it is engaging in a genocide. Anyway.
One, it's not just about European nations helping bolster Ukraine's security. It is also about European nations helping bolster Europe's own security writ large. And it's not like the UK and the rest of Europe really have an option. Anger at Trump, as we've already seen, would likely not get them very far. And so they have to go with this kind of flow, go with this pressure, whether they like it or not. So Trump's dressing down of Zelenskyy really was a reality check for America's allies.
So what is that reality check in that larger perspective?
Basically, it's that the U.S. under President Trump might really not be the ultimate backstop, if you will, or the ultimate security guarantee against any kind of future Russian aggression against Ukraine or against Europe. For example, Ursula von der Leyen, who is president of the European Commission, said that the EU must help first Ukraine become what she called a steel porcupine, and that the EU writ large must urgently rearm itself. Take a listen to this.
After a long time of underinvestment, it is now of utmost importance to step up the defense investment for a prolonged period of time.
EU leaders are expected to unveil a defense package for Europe that also includes Ukraine. That's going to happen in Brussels, but there are many open questions right now. For example, one, how much assistance are they going to give? What weapons and potentially troop deployment, if any, and whether it will all be enough to counter Russia and, John, possibly without the United States.
So
let's turn now to one of the countries.
What is actually happening as a result of this? What is actually happening here, all things considered? Well, there's been memes that have been floating around of Trump basically screaming this was supposed to be my deal, my Nobel Peace Prize. I don't know if those are the things that he has actually been saying, but I am seeing this in a lot of places like Threads and LinkedIn, just people constantly going off about him being upset that people like Obama were able to get prizes like that, and he is not able to. But that all said, him engaging in this behavior is certainly not going to get him there. But now let's go ahead and look at this perspective from the other side of things. Let's take a look at Fox News and see what they have to say here. Of course, it's called a Amer exit. According to Fox, Republicans push for U.S. to leave NATO amid stalled Ukraine peace negotiations. Momentum is building among some Republicans and SpaceX and Tesla CEO Elon Musk to withdraw the U.S. from NATO amid stalled negotiations to end the war in Ukraine. While President Trump reportedly privately floated pulling the U.S. from the alliance during his first term, Senator Mike Lee has publicly backed such efforts in recent weeks and said it is time to leave the alliance after NATO countries held an emergency meeting with Ukraine in London without the United States. Now, I wonder, Senator Mike Lee, why would the United States not be present for a NATO meeting where we actively shat on one of the bulwarks that would actively protect other NATO countries. And we've actively been arguing against Ukraine joining fucking NATO. Lee said in an X post on Sunday that if NATO is moving on without the U.S. should move on from NATO. No, that's not what should happen. What should happen is we should look at NATO and realize, oh, maybe being part of one of the biggest defense forces that, while can be abused, is a bulwark from tyrants like Russia. Being part of one of these defense forces should actually be seen as a thing that we are staying in. We should look at this as a wake-up call, not as a reason to leave. He said, what should we call the movement to get America out of NATO? A mayor exit? NAT exit? Lee said on a Twitter post on Monday. It's a good thing our NATO allies give us such favorable trade terms based on the fact that we provide a disproportionate amount of the security needs. Oh, wait, they don't. Lee isn't the only lawmaker expressing such sentiments. Representative Tom Massey said Sunday in a post on Twitter that NATO is a Cold War relic that needs to be relegated to a talking kiosk at the Smithsonian. These are the things that you only say if you... Shuwade, thank you very much for resubscribing. And Chief Burbs, thank you for resubscribing. Idthunia, thank you for the stretch as well. And Onyx Miku, thank you very much for the follow. However... these are the kind of things a nation only says if they are actively planning on doing something that NATO would prevent. There are two things that NATO prevents: the United States engaging in hostilities with other NATO nations and Russia engaging in hostilities with other NATO nations. If the United States wants to engage in hostilities with other NATO nations, which it can do so with the backing of Russia, then that would be a reason for the United States to be acting the way that they are here. The push to pull out of NATO coincides with a stalled negotiation to end the war in Ukraine, as Ukrainian President Zelenskyy has sought for Ukraine to become a NATO member after Russia invaded his country in 2022. But Trump kicked Zelenskyy out of the White House on Friday after meeting to secure a deal, saying Zelenskyy was welcome back when he was ready for peace, which, again, is just a way of saying kiss the ring. Pulling the U.S. from NATO would require congressional approval, at least. A bipartisan provision included in the 2024 National Defense Authorization Bill requires that the executive branch would need support from 60 senators or passage of legislation in Congress to pull out of the alliance. Senator Tim Kaine and then Senator Marco Rubio, who is now Trump's Secretary of State, spearheaded the provision. Scott Anderson, a fellow in governance studies at the Brookings Institute think tank, said that provisions paves the way for a legal battle that, should the executive branch attempt to unilaterally withdraw the U.S. from the alliance. I can't read. It just says it's there to prevent the U.S. from being able to just withdraw from the alliance. The logic is, essentially, you're teeing up a fight if the president tries to do this without Congress. It specifically does enact exactly the sort of prohibition and says, essentially, we're going to litigate this and take it to the Supreme Court if you try and do this, which is the most Congress can do. Even so, Anderson noted that it's not completely clear who would have legal standing to challenge an effort to withdraw from NATO, although Anderson said service members or people who own property in NATO countries are some who could arguably have standing and challenge the move. Most Americans maintain a favorable opinion of NATO, although support has dropped slightly in recent years. 50% of Americans hold a favorable view of the military alliance, according to a survey in the Pew Research Center in May 2024. However, that's 4% lower than the previous year. Meanwhile, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth urged NATO allies to beef up defense contributions to the alliance in February. Okay, so this is actually this is an interestingly neutral stance from Fox News. You expect when you're reading Fox News to hear a huge bit of support for something like this, and instead it is more just kind of laying out the facts here. I find that very interesting. I find that kind of tepid response very, very interesting. No, I don't think Fox is going woke. I don't think that's what's going on. Heaven forbid, we'd prefer that. No, I think what's happening here is they're unsure of what their audience wants to hear. They are unsure of whether they are supposed to be speaking to the common Republican or speaking to the Trump supporter. They are unsure of which one of these angles gives them the ratings. So they are taking a neutral stance so they can talk about it without losing their audience entirely. Because think about this. Fox News is mostly frequented by boomers and edgy 20-year-olds who are really fucking stupid. Now, one of those audiences plays a lot of Call of Duty, and the other audience had their family members talk to them about their time on the actual line serving their Call of Duty. One of these people has a very favorable opinion of defense sections like NATO because it is the end result of trying to make sure that things like World War II don't happen and the Cold War don't happen again. Some of them lived through some of this, and the other side plays a fuck ton of video games about this. And both of those people see this shit as somewhat important, at least to a degree. At the very least, you would say they have strong opinions about it. Trump, on the other hand, does not like NATO because he wants to suck up to places like Russia. So it makes perfect sense, 100% perfect sense, that the people who subscribe to Fox News could be lost by Fox News if they actually were to put out an article that greatly favored leaving NATO, like hard favored leaving NATO. Not that most of the Fox News viewers are reading this. I'm 100% convinced that most of them don't actually know how to read. What I'm saying is more conservatives play Yu-Gi-Oh! Than Magic the Gathering. That all said, where does this leave us? Well, it leaves us twiddling our thumbs. It leaves us twiddling our thumbs. It doesn't mean that there's nothing we can do. Obviously, when I talked about the Trump-Zelenskyy stuff, I mentioned that town halls are the recent developments in town halls are one of the great things that have been happening lately that we can take advantage of. Note that for us to leave NATO, we would need congressional approval. And note, your congressmen are people that you have direct access to. You can use Mobilize in order to get involved with a group of people that can get involved en masse with talking to your representatives. You can use ResistBot in order to actually get in contact with those representatives. You can use 5 calls to figure out ways to get in contact with them as well directly and literally get on the phone with them. You can go down to your capital, or you can go to the U.S. Capitol if you are so lucky and privileged to go speak with them directly. We have a direct line to these people, and there is a method to talk to them. The white slip method that our Congress allows for. It lets you get in a private conversation for a couple of minutes with any one of these congressmen. And right now, it would probably be a good idea to do so. If congressional approval is what is required, then there are 2 things that we can do. 1, prevent more Republicans from getting in Congress in 2026, which Mobilize will be a very, very useful tool for that. Going to your local DSA chapter to figure out which representatives they want to put forward will help out with that as well. But over and above and on top of that, taking the time to talk with the Congress people that are actively involved right now and letting them know that not only do you vote in their primaries, but you will take them out if they vote to take us out of something like NATO. We can get directly involved in some aspects of this because the bulwark between the president and leaving NATO is our Congress. So, harass our Congress. That's what you do in a situation like this. Progress Only says, my city had almost 90 minutes of 5-minute segments of people in my city talking about immigration rights. Sadly, we had to table it due to last-minute adjustments that not everybody saw. Damn. Briar Santa says, honestly, I hope NATO gets a peace alliance with Ukraine so libs can tell Republicans that Europeans did what Trump couldn't. Yeah. Chesh says, well, that and all the boomers are getting their Social Security cut. Big yikes for them. They voted for it. I feel bad for them, but they voted for it. Chesh says, I'm having Landon on this week on Wednesday to talk about how to talk to your local politicians in a way they'll understand. Good. That is fantastic. Because I am no expert in that. I have only done it a handful of times. and it's been nerve-wracking when I've done it. So I am not an expert in how to do that the most effectively. I just know how to do it because I have done it. That all said, let me know what y'all think in the comment section below. I want to know y'all's opinions. Though, if any of you go in there and say that we should definitely be leaving NATO, I'm going to probably look at that comment and give it the side eye because you're just really fucking stupid. I'm sorry. That all said, if you haven't checked out my Magic the Gathering channel already, please consider doing so. Please consider supporting me over on Patreon or picking up the channel playmat over on Fourth Wall. Obviously, if you have not already subscribed to the politics channel, which is just Suris, please consider doing so. And I also have streams, generally Monday through Thursday, late in the evening, so that we can all chat together about things we love and things that make us get incredibly fucking irate. That all said, thank you all for watching, and insert end of video tagline here. Hey, thanks for making it to the end of the video. I really could not do any of this without all of you. Those of you watching, and especially those of you who support me on Patreon. I wanted to go ahead and take a minute to thank all of you who do that, because with YouTube being what it is these days, I really cannot do this full time without the support from each and every one of you. Those people would be Red Joker, Purple Poundini, Jemshin, Britzkrieg, Jupe the Malignant, Michael, Ravalern, Mabbity Babbity, Astral Frontier, Tales of Atonement, Nixie Chan, Kiri Artemis, Victorian Alchemist, I'm not saying the last part of that, and you know that, Arcton Arclacier, Kiratorian, Dren Hadamata, Jordan M, John L, Lord Bleck, Smiling Game Master, and Fireshard. Thank you so very much. But since you're here, why not go ahead and try watching another one? There should be one that's on the screen right now. And if you are a patron of mine, I wanted to go ahead and thank you again for all of your support. There is still a video you could press though, if you'd like. I would appreciate it just a little bit.